Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Wigs. I'm Joe Cook, and I'm joined once again by our entire political panel. We are right on the eve of Election Day 2024, a momentous election. We've spent a lot of time talking about it in past episodes, and now finally, mercifully, it is finally here. One way or another, we will be put out of our misery tomorrow. Barring what the inevitable court cases and complaints of whichever side loses following the election day tomorrow. But we're going to dive in. We're going to talk about our predictions, and we'll talk about what we foresee happening tomorrow. So, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing?
Good, Joe.
Good.
Yeah,
Doing very well.
fine.
From
Getting ready for my trip. So
Yes.
So, just for what it's worth, I'll start with a couple things here. Share my screen with all of you. Of course, listeners won't be able to see, but I can share some things on the episode description. But as of now, for whatever it's worth, 538.com, of course, website that focuses on statistics and predictions, has it as a 53% chance of Trump winning the election and a 47% chance of Kamala Harris winning the election. Of course, this is not perfect, and that's essentially a statistical tie, dead heat, 50-50. But, if you're going out one day and the chance of rain is 53% versus 47%, that's not changing drastically how you approach getting ready for the day. But that's their prediction. But I just wanted to play about a minute of something from a few months ago, and then I'm going to open it up for each of you to give your initial thoughts. We'll dive into some specific predictions, and we'll take this through our episode. But a few months ago here at Hudson Catholic, we hosted an event, the history department, on the importance of voting. And I just wanted to play a short clip from my remarks at that event. We held this event on Lincoln's birthday. So this was even before Kamala Harris was the nominee. I guess Trump wasn't even technically nominated yet at that point, but we all kind of knew it was heading that way. But it was just a kind of a non-biased approach to why it's important to vote. It was a voting registration drive for our students. So let me just play a short part of my remarks here, and we'll open it up for all of your remarks.
All people have a God-given power and a God-given right to have a say in the direction and governance of their lives. Elections belong to the people, Abraham Lincoln said, whose birthday is today. It's their decision, Lincoln said. If they decide to turn their back on the fire and burn their own behinds, then they'll just have to sit on their blisters. We all bear responsibility for the outcomes of our elections and the decisions and actions of our government. The government is a reflection of us, of we the people. Therefore, do not be discouraged. Do not be lazy. Do not think it doesn't matter. Do not take your responsibility lightly. Do not burn your own behind by voting against your own interests, or letting those who don't have your interests in mind be the deciding votes. Do not think, oh, well, I voted in the last election. The guy I voted for lost. So what's the point? I have voted for plenty of losers. There's honor and importance even in losing. Have tremendous power, but only if we use it. Decisions are made by those who show up. Make sure you always show up to make your voices heard, to honor those who have fought to give you that right, and to make sure people in the future have that same right. If we do not give up, our democracy will persevere. Do not let government of the people, by the people, and for the people ever perish from this earth.
That was kind of the conclusion of my remarks. It's a lot about turnout, about who shows up. So how are we feeling about who's going to show up tomorrow? And I'll open it up. Let's go with Daniel first today.
Greetings from Greece, the birthplace of democracy. What's left of it, what isn't owned by the big pharma, big media, national nation state military industrial complex, our precious little vote. How cute. So anyway, outside my ridiculous introduction, I think that Donald Trump carries this election pretty handily. I would say probably in jeopardy of losing the popular vote, but still winning the electoral college. I think he takes Michigan. I think he takes North Carolina. obviously takes Florida. Arizona is always a toss-up, but we'll say that one will go Trump. Colorado, I'm going to say that one goes Harris. But I do think there's one or two surprises in there where you're going to see a state that was purple or even blue go for the orange king. That's what I'm calling them these days. So yeah, I think it's a Trump victory, and then let's see what happens after that. But that would be my prediction.
So bold predictions was going to be a question I was going to ask, but what do you see most likely as that blue state or bluish purple state you think is most likely to flip? Is it Colorado? You mentioned Colorado there.
Yeah, I think that particular purple state, I think that one goes blue. But I think, like I said, there's maybe one or two surprises that, I wouldn't probably pick, or that you might necessarily pick decisively as an automatic blue state. But the turnout is obviously going to be a lot lower, which typically will kind of favor a Republican or conservative candidate. Doesn't seem like Harris or Biden, for that matter, before she got the nod or cigar room deal, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't seem like she really activated a lot of their base, and we'll still have roughly 80 million Americans who are eligible to vote, not voting. No surprise there. So, looks like it's probably gonna not be a red wave like they're always talking about, but seems like we'll just get enough foam at the top to see a Republican win this one.
Bill, let's go to the opposite end. Why is Kamala going to win in a blowout?
Well, I don't see her winning in a blowout. I do see her winning. I see the electoral votes a little differently from Daniel. I believe that the Democratic ground game is a lot stronger than the Republican ground game, and I think that they're better organized to bring out the vote. And I do believe that she'll win without having to go to the courts. I'm sure that Trump will go to the courts, and I'll use this caveat. If this ever gets to the Supreme Court, I have no doubt in my mind that Trump will basically be the victor, a la, Gore v. Bush in 2000. I kind of think that there are going to be some surprises, and I was happy to see. I was very shocked to see that the polling in Iowa, which had Harris up in Iowa. I think that suburban vote is going to be very important, especially votes for women. I think the drama, the chaos of Trump's years as president and what ensued in Stop the Steal nonsense, I think that's impacted people to say, we've had enough of this. I don't think that initially, I think that Harris will win the popular vote. I think she'll win the electoral vote to the point where it won't have to go to the Supreme Court. So that's kind of what I feel.
Doctor, you want to go next?
Okay, well, before I go on this, I just want to correct myself, because a couple of podcasts ago I said that Milton Friedman may have said that you cannot tax yourself into prosperity. So, and you pointed out it wasn't him. So I did some research, and it was actually Winston Churchill who said it in 1904, while Milton Friedman was born in 1912. And what Churchill said was that for a nation to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket and trying to pull himself up by the handle. So he said it in a more elegant way. But going back to the subject here, I mean, my feeling is obviously none of us know what's going to happen, and the polls have been recently wrong, such as the red wave that was predicted and didn't happen. And the last time also the Democrats outperformed what was predicted. So what I find very compelling is that there is this huge gender gap. So you have men up 15 points for Trump and women up about the same for Harris. So basically, if there are more women voting, and most of the statisticians will say if if the electorate is 53% or more women, then Harris is going to win. There is no way that Trump can. So I find that very sort of compelling in that women tend to vote more than men and are more likely to show up, more likely to vote. So that is one thing. So if you want prediction, I believe that Harris is going to win pretty convincingly. And, later I can tell you which states I think Trump might win. But, my main concern, and maybe we will talk about that further, is what's going to happen after the election. Because as we talked before, Trump is a severe narcissist, or if you like, malignant narcissist, and he will never, ever admit, no matter what happens, he will never admit he lost. So then the question is going to be, if there will be, there is a subsection of his supporters whom I would call the crazies, or like the violent type of people with very poor impulse control, if they are going to start causing riots, and whether he's actually, if he goes to court, that's fine. But if he starts prodding people towards protests, which will eventually erupt in violence. So that's my concern.
Judge, let's turn to you.
Well, I'm concerned about the election in the sense that I think it is going to be a close victory for Harris, and what that portends, I don't know. I'm not as concerned about overt violence than the fact that we'll be in for a long, perhaps, litigation process. Billy brought up the poll in Iowa, but you have the Des Moines Register poll that has Harris up by 4, and then you have a poll from Emerson, which is considered to be a reputable poll, which has Trump up by 10. Now, that to me is very strange, that you could have a 14-point swing from two well-respected polls taken at about the same time. I don't know what to make of things like that. In fact, the whole polling process this election has been all over the place from reputable polls. And I don't know what that means, other than we're in for a close election. Now, I will say this. I think over the past 10 days or so that Harris has gained some momentum. I think that things for her had slowed down. I think Trump maybe looked to be gaining some strength. But in the past 10 days, that's not the feeling I have. And of course, a lot of that is here, Trump-induced syndrome. So I will add one thing, by the way. I want to, maybe this isn't the appropriate time, but I'll throw it out there. I saw something over the weekend where the prediction was that it would be Harris getting the 270 electoral votes on the head with that district in Nebraska.
Yes.
Now, I was under the impression that that was a settled matter as far as Nebraska trying to change their system of voting. And I believe it was someone from the New York Times who said that Nebraska could still, between the election and the time that the election is certified, that they could change that. And I found that to be very disturbing, And I think that could cause a tremendous backlash if something like that were to happen. So I throw that out there.
Yeah,
So let me jump in there. I think obviously, for most of this panel here, election interference could never happen. Never happens. We have the safest elections ever. I think, throwing out these caveats, like what the judge just mentioned, tampering with the democratic process is absolutely not only probable, but you cannot always have an airtight understanding of what happens in different county board of election offices because they're controlled by one particular party. 81% of America, urban America, is controlled by the Democratic Party, and people that work for the board of elections often hold 2 and 3 jobs within the county. And so to actually look at voter rolls, to look at the verification of signatures, obviously the whole thing with the voter ID is absolutely absurd. If you have to show an ID in Palestine to vote, you should have an ID to show in America to vote. A lot of the evidence that could otherwise be found to substantiate elections would otherwise be thrown away. It's completely turnkey. We just have to trust that the Democratic Party has done their due diligence within all these, counties like Hudson County, horribly corrupt systemically, to just trust that they had the good interest of voters at hand. And so, yes, the judge is absolutely correct that in Nebraska, they could do a flip-flop thing and actually change certain state laws to allow certain things to happen for, an electoral college vote to go one way or the other. What's to say that you would ever come to a real understanding of what happened, and I know that they, these people on the media and, stuff, my uncles here like to, parrot some of their same ideas, that there were 50, lawsuits that Trump brought up. None of them, ever panned out. They're ridiculous, like let's tar and feather Rudy Giuliani, et cetera, et cetera. But like, isn't it true that McKinley in, I think it was 1896, there was a fraudulent election. They barely got to open up the voter rolls in Jim Crow South to understand what happened there. And they did, and they cracked the case. Now, what's to say that democracy is totally like, oh, it's airtight, 100%. There's never any fraud. But all of us have lived in all these cities where we know things are horribly fraudulent. So I missed something here intellectually when we just throw away this idea of like a democracy. Just because it's a democracy on paper is automatically going to do the right thing ethically to verify that certain votes have gone one way or the other. And again, maybe that makes me a crazy, oh no. Again, like, yeah, those are just my feelings. But
Daniel, can your parrot uncle respond to that? I'm just going to throw one example out there that basically blows your argument out of the water. What about Georgia? What about Georgia? What about all the court cases? What about Arizona? When the Republicans controlled Arizona, those basically states went for Biden. There was absolutely no validity to your thing within the courts of law. 64 cases went down. And to watch Rudy Giuliani debase himself for Donald Trump and act like an utter fool, I mean, he's lost everything for trying to prop up that lie. Ask Rupert Murdoch when he admitted in court during the Dominion voting case that, yes, there was no steal. Donald Trump won the election, yet his company paid $800 million to Dominion because they lied. So if you're talking about the press, you have to factor in the Republican press, the money that's behind Donald Trump, a la Rupert Murdoch and News Corp. So your parrot uncle has said his piece.
Can I just add that we don't have to tar and feather Rudy Giuliani. We just need the feathers because sometimes black liquid just leaks out of him naturally. So you don't need to add tar to him.
Yeah, but okay, that's a fair response. It's a fair response. It's a fair response, but at the same time, don't we basically just have to trust that these entities that exist within these like very corrupt systemic systems are telling the truth when like there was never really a proper signature verification that took place in Georgia. As far as like certain information being collected in Arizona, there was a really short amount of time to do it. Certain things with regard to access never really took place as far as there being a complete disposal of information. I think like you have such a short amount of time to really verify that a certain election went one way or the other. And obviously there were systemic issues in 2020 where there was this whole voter, registration by mail that took place for the first time. So it's like, you have this new process whereby it's never been done before. And now you automatically just have to trust that, these election results are verifiable. And like, again, I know that the
Who do you
language is
trust?
used
Donald
over and
Trump?
over again.
The ultimate liar? Donald Trump? He's the one who spreads these seeds. Michael, did you send him Bremer's video that I watched?
To everybody, but if I can make a comment here, because
Go ahead, Doctor.
one of the problems is this, and this sort of relates to the video that I saw, is that Donald Trump and his sycophants will always say, we will accept the election if we win, but if we don't win, or they will say, we will accept the election if we win, but the election has to be fair. So they basically put themselves above logic, because basically if they win, they will accept it, and if they don't win, they will say something was unfair or they were cheated on it. So again, that's narcissistic. Let me just finish. So that's a narcissistic position, because you don't put, it's like if the Yankees said, well, if we win the World Series, we are going to accept it, but if we don't win, somebody cheated or we were treated unfairly. And this is definitely what Donald Trump will say in all of his sycophants. I was yesterday listening to Tim Scott's interview, and Tim Scott said exactly the same thing. He said, as long as it's fair, we will accept it. Then I was listening to the interview of Mark Kelly, and Mark Kelly said, we will accept it no matter what. And that is the right position to have. You have to accept defeat. But a narcissist will never accept defeat. And the problem is, and I say it with peace, love, and understanding, but what I'm saying to my friend and nephew Daniel is that that's just, you're taking a position which is kind of almost godlike, because you are saying that either you win, or if you don't win, something was done wrongly.
So I'm not saying that. Again, I think that sort of verbiage is regurgitated with the 24/7 news cycle. So you could make, anyone that has a problem with the 2020 election, automatically some sort of like wild figure that just trusts baseless information, right?
But are we not talking about Donald Trump's view of this? I mean, isn't his the one that matters the most? That he's the one who's going to cause a problem if he doesn't.
Well, that was not the way it was framed in the way that both of my uncles said it.
Okay.
It was framed exactly that way, Daniel. Videos don't lie unless they're doctored, but maybe.
Okay, I don't want a back and forth of that, but
yeah, no, I'm just talking about, so like if it comes out that he loses fair and square, and it's an election process that he must suspend his presidency because he's lost the electoral college, and it's a democratic process and he loses by 40 or 50 electoral college votes, then he lost, and he should move on.
Well, what happens if he loses by 10 electoral votes? And I'm having a little difficulty following this now, Dan. And really, I started it out with my example about Nebraska.
I do want to come back to your scenario about Nebraska. Right. Continue, Judge.
No, I'm glad. All right, I'm going to allow you to obviously get us back on track with that. But look, whether either side wins by 10 electoral votes or 50 electoral votes, that's what has to be accepted. And there was a lot of talk that had some procedural errors, by the way. Number one, for instance, I don't know how it is in other states. In New Jersey, your county boards of election are bipartisan. All right, that's one point I want to make. All right, and number two, where do you come up with this, Dan, about this rampant voter? All right, I'm limiting you now to voting corruption in cities. Where's your evidence of that? Because you say that in a very offhanded way, like it's it's been proven somewhere. And that's like these old urban legends about corruption being rampant all over the place. Well, I don't think that's the case when it comes to, and I'm talking now about voting. I'm not talking about criminality. All right. So, and frankly, I don't want to keep going back to the 2020 election. All right. I for one, think that serves no purpose at this point. So that's what I have to say.
I do want to come back to the scenario specifically that you brought up earlier about Nebraska, which is if the state legislature, or whoever it may be, decides at the last moment to change how Nebraska does their awarding of electoral votes, because they are one of the two states that currently divides up their electoral votes by congressional district, Maine being the other one. But if we're talking about, well, okay, that district, that one individual district votes for Kamala Harris after the votes are counted, and she gets to 270 and he gets to 268. And I had the scenario, the map up there for all of you to see for a little bit, but my computer kept freezing, so I'm not even sure if it was going on. But that involves basically Kamala Harris winning the blue wall states of the Rust Belt, Donald Trump winning all of the swing states of the Sun Belt, including Nevada, and she wins that one congressional district in Nebraska. That gets us to Kamala Harris having 270, Donald Trump having 268, which is as close as you could possibly have it. If that's not the scenario, if that electoral vote goes to, if they change it somehow and it goes to Donald Trump, you get 269, 269. And then it's up to the House of Representatives to choose the winner. And it's by state delegation in the House of Representatives is how they vote in a scenario like that. And more state delegations are controlled by Republicans than are controlled by Democrats. And therefore, the Republicans would win the election. But is not changing how that is done post facto the way that you're talking about, is that not a corrupt act? I mean, if everybody goes into the election understanding that this is how Nebraska awards its electoral votes, and then at the last second you're like, well, we have doubts about what happened in Omaha, so we're just going to award that electoral vote to the person who won the statewide popular vote. Isn't that the exact kind of corrupt act that we're talking about?
So I would just say this, to the judge's point. He asked, Daniel, do you have evidence? And the answer is no, because all the evidence is always buried within the process of the one-party system in urban America. Are there absolute abuses on both sides in a bipartisan, corrupt, defunctory, democratic system? The answer is yes. It goes both ways. We found tons of fraud cases that have happened in red rural states where people have been caught with their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. So the answer is yes. But unfortunately, the largest populous zones are urban enterprise regions. And we know that usually 6 to 8 counties usually decide the popular vote for a presidential candidate. And so you would have to essentially have a quick turnaround from the first week of November to the first week of January to figure out, was there any systemic problem in an election? So we're just in a position, Judge, where we have to trust that the results are real. Now, when you add electronic voting systems in, when you add new voter registration processes, when you add, different means by voting by mail, you're adding in a lot of new variables to try to back check it. Now, do I condone violence? No, absolutely not. We also know that every single revolution throughout history has been, founded basically with violence, if you're talking about the establishment of nation states. So I think it's naive to assume that human beings aren't going to respond violently if they feel like there hasn't been a democratic process. And again, I would say that, the 2020 election was what it was. And I prefer not to go back there either, but there are a lot of question marks that were never answered because big media told us that we could trust the election as the most trustworthy election in history. And again, if you go by like mind control tactics, this saying over and over and over again, this was the safest election ever. This was the safest election ever. You just begin to put that message into people's heads, because if anyone says anything opposite of that, then they're like some sort of lunatic who like doesn't say anything with like baseless, that says everything with baseless reason. And so like in this election process, I would say it again, just before I kind of have to leave it to you guys to speak a little bit more because I've taken up a little bit more airtime, is that if there is a decisive vote for either candidate, then the other candidate should do the respectful thing and bow out and understand that they lost. And they should also tell their supporters that the election was fair and it's over. And they should throw their hat behind the support of the other candidate because it's still about American ideals and principles. And that's really where I'll stand on that one, because I'm not some sort of sycophant, Uncle Michael.
Okay.
Just
Sound like a guilty conscience, Daniel.
Doctor, you can respond quickly. Then I want to get to some specific topics.
Just to answer Joe's question, I totally agree with Joe here that it would be terrible if they suddenly changed the system. My understanding is just like the judge, Ed, is that I thought it was a settled case. They tried to do it and it didn't work out. So certainly I would say that would be totally corrupt if they gave it to Trump in the last minute. But as far as what Daniel said, I mean, you just admitted that you have no proof that there is some kind of a corruption in counting of the votes. So since you have no proof, then it's based on belief. And anybody can believe whatever they want. Somebody could believe that the earth is flat. So that's the problem. People have to, and Donald Trump, unfortunately, will never do what you just said he should do. If he loses, that he should bow out. He's going to say, I will sell my house and give you all the proceeds if I'm wrong here. That Donald Trump, no matter how close it is or how not close it is going to say that there was cheating or that he was cheated out of it. And he will prompt these people towards impulsive action and possibly violence. He's not going to, and the reason I'm saying it, because he has done it before. And he has never admitted to anything that he has done wrong. You know, the phone call to Zelensky was the best phone call, the most wonderful phone call ever.
As was the call to Raffensperger saying, I just need you to find me 15,000 votes.
Right.
No, 11,000 something.
So he's not whatever the number was, but
11,070.
This is a guy who everything he's ever lost in his life he's claimed was because of fraud. Going all the way back to the Emmys when he was on The Apprentice, he claimed there was fraud, and that's why The Apprentice would lose the Emmys elections. Scotsman of the Year one time was something that was handed out by some organization. He claimed he didn't win it because of fraud. It's just what he does. We seem to have lost Daniel. I don't know if he made his final point and then wanted to do a mic drop and leave, or if he got kicked out, but I'm watching.
Now, that's a Jersey City move. You're playing basketball on the courts and you're losing and it's your ball. You take your ball and you go home. I hope that's not the case. Let's move on.
You know, I'm teaching early baseball history in my sports history class right now, and that was very literal in the 1800s when it was hard to come across just having a ball to play with. You had to keep happy the person who had the ball because otherwise they might get home. But I want to come to, because personally, my prediction, I mean, I had the map up again. My internet browser kept freezing, so I closed it out. But my personal expectation is that it's going to come down to Pennsylvania. I've looked at the map over and over again. I have Harris winning Michigan and Wisconsin. I have Trump winning North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona. Everything else kind of breaks the way it breaks. Nevada becomes irrelevant in that scenario. But I think it all comes down to Pennsylvania, what's going to put somebody over the top. Is there a single state that all of you think it's going to come down to? And if so, what do you think is going to happen there? Or just how close do you think this is going to be? Let's kind of run through the swing states and just go around, say who you think is going to win each one. And let's start with Michigan. We'll go Bill, Judge, and Dr. Buxbaum. Michigan, what's your prediction, Bill?
I think Harris wins Michigan.
Harris should win Michigan.
Harris.
Okay. We all have her winning Michigan. We already heard Daniel has Trump winning Michigan in his opening remarks. Wisconsin, which personally I think is the most comfortable of the swing states for the Democrats. So I have Harris winning there. Bill?
I have Harris there too.
And if anybody has, remarks you want to make about any of these states, certainly you're free to add on.
I have Harris winning if Michael Buxbaum votes there.
Well, Michael's a Pennsylvania voter, so we'll come to his time.
No, definitely Wisconsin.
Wisconsin should go for Harris, but that's another place where there's some strange polling numbers. But
yeah,
it should go for Harris.
Yeah, I've noticed that too. That Wisconsin, like you said, should be the most comfortable for the Democrats out of all of these, and yet some of the polls have it weirdly, and there's a wide range, like the one you were talking about in Iowa earlier, that there seems to be this almost 10-point discrepancy between some of the polls in Wisconsin. I just don't understand how that happens. Even if you have a 5-point margin of error stated in your poll, you're talking about then the two polls are at the extreme ends of the margin of error just to come together and say somewhere in the middle is where it actually is. And that, I don't know. The polling has been strange this year in a number of these places. Let's leave Pennsylvania to the end because I think that's the most interesting and important. I'm going to go down south to my old home in North Carolina. Who's winning the land of the pines?
You know what? I'm going to tell you right now. My druthers tells me Trump wins, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure he's not going to have that millstone around his neck of
Mark Robinson.
Yeah, you know, and I kind of think that he is going to drag his vote down a little bit. But when it all comes to pass, I kind of think that, yeah, I think Trump.
Yeah, I would agree with Bill. I would give it to Trump.
I also think it could be Trump, or it very well may be Trump. But I have a feeling that something strange might happen here with this election where, and I know we're going to get to Pennsylvania, but wouldn't it be a surprise if you had Trump take Pennsylvania and Harris then takes North Carolina, and of course that brings other states into play too. But I guess Trump in North Carolina.
Yeah, I agree with Bill that the Mark Robinson thing, that is his name, right? The guy running for governor.
Yes. Governor, that's right. Yeah.
Let's throw a wild, yeah, it's not a Senate race, it's the governor's race.
Right.
Governor Cooper is term limited, so he's done, and it's the governor's race. But that does throw a little bit of a wild card into things just because of how outrageous he is as a gubernatorial candidate. And
Joe, I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry.
North Carolina's been a bit of a dream for the Democrats ever since 2008 when Obama won it. But in 2012, it went back to Romney. 2016, Trump won it. 2020, Trump won it. So it's that state that seemingly the Democrats always want. I know Georgia was in that camp until last election. They always seem they think they're about to get it, and then they fall short. But maybe this time, who knows? Bill, what were you going to say?
You know, I kind of think that Trump's done a decent job of distancing himself from Robinson. You know, anytime he's appeared there, he hasn't appeared with him, nor would he. You know, I mean, he threw him to the wolves ASAP, and rightfully so. But he's never basically criticized him. So I think that that's part of the reason why I don't think the Dems would win, because he is on the top of the ticket. You know what I mean? If anything, it makes the governor's race a little bit closer, but I can't imagine people voting there. I think there's another wild card in that situation too, the devastation with regard to the hurricane out in the western part of the state. I mean, some of those areas are like completely devastated. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of impact that has, and I don't know what that would be.
Yeah, that's true. Let's continue down south to Georgia.
Oh,
Georgia was a surprise last time.
If you
Biden
trust
won it.
the polls, Harris is winning in Georgia. And I think Harris is going to, if she carries the state, and I think she might, it's going to be because of those Atlanta suburbs and those suburban areas. And I'm going to tell you another thing about Georgia, too. I think Georgia has a pretty large population of Latinos, i.e. Puerto Ricans, and they also do have a lot of Yankees that have moved to Georgia. You know, and I think that bodes well for Harris, and I think she's made some impact there.
But we had Herschel Walker reappear in Georgia over the weekend campaigning for, although he accidentally said to vote for Donald Trump Jr., and then he seemed to not remember what Donald Trump's name was as he tried to correct himself. But that lined up with his Senate race in Georgia. Doctor, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that Georgia, you know, again, it's hard to predict, but I would give it to Harris largely because they have two Democratic senators, so they're used to voting for Democrats, and you know, they put a lot of effort into it. So Again, I could be wrong, but I would give it to Harris.
Georgia's really a very difficult state to predict. There are a lot of confluences going on there. I'd love to say Harris, but I think Trump could pull it off in Georgia. One thing I do want to say, following up on what Bill said about Yankees moving to Georgia and these other southern states. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what side you're on, these Yankees that are moving to these southern states, and I'll use Florida as Exhibit A, all right, are people who vote Republican. Either they were Republicans, or when they get down south, they become Republicans. So I'm going to take a little different tact about that. Now, on the Latino issue, that's different. And that of course, we really haven't discussed that too much, about the impact of those remarks that were made and Trump's reaction to those remarks. But I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make in the election. I'd like to think it would make a substantial difference, but I'm not so sure.
We can talk about that with Pennsylvania also, because there is a substantial Puerto Rican population in Pennsylvania.
Yes,
although his response was the typical Trump response. I don't know who that guy is. I've never heard of him before. I didn't put him up there at my event. I mean, that's what he says about everybody that causes trouble for his campaign. Let's do Arizona real quick, and then we'll come to Pennsylvania. So what do we have in Arizona? My most fervent hope is that Carrie Lake loses the Senate race and goes away, because she's a loser, as I said in an older episode when she lost her last election. Carrie Lake insulted a lot of John McCain Republicans like myself, so I'm very happy to see her lose over and over and over again. But what do we have happening in Arizona?
That's, again, not unlike North Carolina. The top of the ticket is Trump. I'm not sure. I mean, I still have to say that that's a toss-up. I think it leans blue for the two senators. I'm not so sure how much Carrie Lake would drag Trump down. But yeah, I'm going to say that's a toss-up. I really don't know. Flip a coin.
Well, I would, again, I would probably give it to Trump, just because the polling is probably the strongest for Trump, although it's within margin of error. But I could be wrong. But, we all have to make a guess. And I totally...
Call it out, making guesses.
Right. So, but I agree with you completely. This Carrie Lake, I mean, for me, the worst thing is this election denialism. And she is just like coming out of Donald Trump's colon, basically. So it's just, I just hate her. And so, but I still have, but I probably would give it to Trump.
I think, based on the polling, it looks like Trump, and it's somewhat surprising to me, is solid in Arizona. And like I said, I don't quite understand it, although it's going to go back to something that I said about people moving into a state like Arizona, retirees from other states, and they tend to be voting Republican. And that's despite Mark Kelly being very popular there in Arizona. And I concur with what we're all saying about Carrie Lake. She's literally right up Trump's alley. So let's leave it at that.
All right, but let's come to the big one, which is Pennsylvania, and then I have one last question for everybody as we make these final predictions. I got about 8 minutes left here before I have a class coming in. What do we have happening in Pennsylvania? I've been bugging my friends in Pennsylvania for the last couple of weeks about how they have to get the votes out, because it's all coming down to Pennsylvania in my point of view. So, Bill, what's happening in the Keystone State?
I think Harris wins, and I think she wins. When I'm saying comfortably, a couple of points.
Yeah, I mean, I just realized that it's only my vote that matters. And since all of you guys are
That sounds awfully narcissistic to say.
which is kind of strange, I'm from.
It's not a malignant narcissist.
I am from.
He's an affable one.
I mean, one thing I have learned when I came to the US that this is not really truly a democracy because it's not one man, one vote. And only right now you have 6 to 7 swing states out of 50 states where it actually matters. So, for myself, I voted for Larry Hogan because I didn't like either of those two candidates. And I think Larry Hogan would be great. But of course, he's only running for a Senate seat in Maryland, which he probably might lose, although I hope he won't. But, I think it's a very divided state. But I still, I'm mostly impressed by the female vote. And the females are just really breaking heavily for Harris. And I agree with Bill that the Hispanic, it was a joke, but it was bad taste. So I would agree that there are a lot of Hispanic Puerto Rican people living here. So that's not going to help him. So I would probably go with Harris as well for Pennsylvania.
Harris should win in Pennsylvania, but I don't know. This is the one state where the polling has remained, and correct me if I'm wrong, relatively consistent in the closeness of the race. And the vast majority of polls indicate, the same thing. I'm worried about Pennsylvania, and it's going to come back to something that Bill had said earlier about the ground game. The ground game is going to be key in Pennsylvania. Key. In the Keystone State. I'm going to say Harris, but I'd like to think that she could have opened up a bigger lead. And maybe that'll happen. Because I will say again, I think right now the momentum, whatever there is as far as momentum, is with Harris.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, my old friend from college, Bill, you might remember we did an episode one time about trying to rename a street in Philadelphia. Yes. And that campaign is having success. Just recently, they are on track to rename that street, which is great. But he's a Democratic committee person in Philadelphia, and they've been out. They've been trying to get everybody who requested mail ballots to send them in. They've got the transportation lined up to get people to the polls, at least in Philly. That's the population center. So fingers crossed for those of us who want Kamala Harris to win. But he did share with me the other day, because I've been bugging him, telling him it's all about him. He's the only one that matters. What did he say the other day? He said, well, basically that she's going to win. They have 2 Democratic senators. They have a Democratic governor they just elected. He said, inflation is bad, but in the end, Democrats win in Pennsylvania. So he's expressing more confidence than I am, but that's from coming inside the Democratic committee people of Philadelphia. So take that for what it is. I'm sure Daniel would have a long thing to say about that if he had not been disconnected about taking the word of a urban Philadelphia Democratic committee member. But I want to ask one last thing here. We have 2 minutes left. Everybody, what's the biggest surprise you foresee happening on Election Day? Is Ted Cruz losing? Is Iowa going to go Democratic? If there is any surprise you foresee, maybe the outcome of who controls the House or the Senate, right? The Republicans are expected to take the Senate. Do the Democrats hold on to it? If there is one surprise, what's your bold prediction surprise for Election Day tomorrow?
I don't think it's bold. I think that the Senate will go to GOP. I think the Congress flips back to the Democrats. And bold surprise, either or Ted Cruz or Rick Scott. For whatever reason, Rick Scott's been polling terribly in Florida. And so has Ted Cruz. Maybe their reputations have caught up to them. So one of those two, I think, will happen.
Judge, your boldest prediction for election day?
Well, I'm also I don't know how bold this is. I mean, I believe it's very important for the Democrats to retake the House of Representatives, especially if Trump were to win. I mean, that would be critical. And so I'm going to say that's. I don't think we can say that that's a surprise, although it is up in the air from based on what I've seen. But so I'm going to say that's my surprise.
Yeah. And Doctor, if I remember right, you said that you are God in your last answer. So what is your final prediction?
I'm accusing Donald Trump of what I am myself. But no, and actually, the tennis street in Philadelphia is still going. There is no mood to change it. But anyway, my biggest surprise would be if Donald Trump conceded and shook Harris's hand, hugged her, and told her congratulations.
I wish I had thought of that.
That would be a gigantic surprise. Definitely the boldest prediction of all. Well,
uranium moves back in.
Tomorrow is election day. Tomorrow night or the next day, we can all listen to this and see how wrong we all were about everything we predicted today. But hopefully, we're more right than wrong when we wake up in a couple mornings and see what the results of this are. I don't know how long counting will take in some of these close states, but hopefully, we won't be proven too wrong in these next few days as our listeners catch up with the show. But listeners out there, tomorrow is election day. If you have not cast your ballot yet by mail or early voting, make sure you get out there and vote. As I said in the opening remarks that I shared from an event a few months ago, it is critically important, even for those of us who feel like our votes don't matter. You never know in a local race, in anything, what the power of your vote may be. And it's critical to exercise that most basic fundamental right and freedom of being an American. So everybody get out there, use your vote, let your voices be heard, and we will see what the results are. And we'll see all of you again soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Take care, everybody.